Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, where we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 497. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another exciting guest. Today, I'm talking with Christine Reed. I recently read her fantastic book, Alone in Wonderland, about her experience on the Wonderland Trail in Washington State in the United States. It's a fantastic blend of travel memoir and reflections on her life's experiences, and I highly recommend it. It's a trail that I'd never heard of before I read this book, and I really enjoyed it. It's a short 93-mile trail that's really challenging and yet also really beautiful from what it sounds like. So in this episode, we talk about the inner journey of backpacking as well as the practical lessons. And we talk about lessons learned from hiking multiple trails. We discuss how trails can help us to figure things out and how to get started on your own backpacking adventures. So who is Christine Reed? Christine is a long-distance backpacker and author of the memoir, Alone in Wonderland. She shares her personal journey from sedentary office worker to rugged outdoors woman in hopes of inspiring others to see something bigger for themselves, whatever that may be. But also to remind us that a good story is about sharing something of ourselves and connecting with others. She's found in the outdoor community, the first place that ever felt like home. So what are you going to learn in today's episode? We discuss where is the Wonderland Trail, what is it, and why you might want to hike it. We talk about how solo backpacking helps us to figure things out. We discuss further benefits of solo backpacking. We talk about why through hiking is about finding ourselves. And finally, we talk about how solo backpacking can help us to quit the comparison trap. Hope you find this episode interesting and useful and inspiring. Let's go. Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Good. I really look forward to discussing your book with you and the Wonderland Trail and all of your adventures. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am an author and long distance backpacker. I suppose those are my two biggest identities at this point. I got into backpacking, it'll be 8 years ago this year, and it's sort of become a big part of my life and a big part of, I suppose, what I'm trying to bring with my storytelling.
And how did you first get into backpacking?
I was freshly graduated from college in 2013, and I was working in health insurance, and I sat at a computer all day long, and I just sort of found a blog about the Appalachian Trail through some random clicking one day. And it really captured me, something about the way that people talked about the experience of hiking the Appalachian Trail. Just, it lit a fire in me that made absolutely no sense because I had never been a hiker. I was not interested in the outdoors. But yeah, people on these blogs were just talking about how the Appalachian Trail had changed their life and helped them figure out what was important. Those sounded like things that I needed. And so I sort of dove in head first.
And how was your experience on the Appalachian Trail?
Well, definitely changed my life.
Yeah.
It was good. It was bad. It was all the things that long distance can be. I went out in the spring of 2015. So it was a little over a year after I originally read about it that I set foot on the trail. And it didn't go any of the ways that I thought that it would. Part of the reason I wanted to do it was really to challenge myself to do something really physically hard because I had never done that before. And I definitely got that. Yeah.
Well, good. It's good that you achieved your intentions on that one. It's a big goal. You know, I think so many people read books about people hiking these long distance trails in the United States, and they watch movies about it and they're like, yeah, I can do this. And then the reality is not very Hollywood. It's a bit more rough.
It's definitely not a glamorous experience. I will say that. Yeah, I do think the Appalachian Trail is such a unique experience because it is unlike any of the other long trails that it comes along with this community and it's organized in such a way, you have shelters along the trail. So there's sort of these communal gathering spaces the entire time you're out there. And other trails, obviously, there are other people and you will make friends, and there is a social aspect for sure. But I feel like the social aspect on the AT is particularly special. And I like to tell people who are unsure of their ability to do something like this that the AT is a great starter trail because it really holds your hand along the way. There's so many towns to stop in. There's so much opportunity to learn and get assistance along the way that even if you are unsure, am I physically capable of walking 2,000 miles? It's sort of one of those things you can just go out and see. And if things go badly, there's a lot of opportunity to bail, essentially.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's a lot less remote than the Pacific Crest Trail and I think probably also the Continental Divide Trail. And you do pass a lot closer to little towns and things. So I think it's probably not as scary for a first timer.
Absolutely. Yeah. You feel a bit more in the civilization and you have the opportunity to switch out your gear to get things if something breaks or if you realize you need something you didn't know you needed. Yeah, there's just a lot more opportunity to like touch in with the reality.
Make contact with your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So a few years after you backpacked the Appalachian Trail, you backpacked along the Wonderland Trail in Washington State. I had never heard of this trail before. Can you tell us a little bit about it? It's one of the lesser known trails, at least. I mean, I don't live in the United States anymore, so.
Yeah, absolutely. The Wonderland Trail is a 93-mile loop that circles around Mount Rainier in Washington. The entire trail is within the national park boundary, and it's very heavily permitted. There's assigned campsites, so you have to get a permit saying you're staying at this camp on Monday and this camp on Tuesday. So it's a bit more structured than something like the Appalachian Trail, but it's absolutely beautiful. You get everything from pine forests, kind of that like evergreen Pacific Northwest experience, to really beautiful alpine environments, lots of rocky, craggy, sort of like big mountainside feelings. And then, of course, Mount Rainier is a glaciated peak. So you're just below the glaciers on some sections of the trail as well.
Oh, that's really lovely. Why did you decide on this trail?
It was a bit of a happenstance. I had heard of it a few times from AT people and hiking people that I was in contact with, but I hadn't really thought about doing it. But then I had moved into my van a few months before and was traveling around, and I just sort of made my way to the Pacific Northwest. And I went on a day hike with a friend in Mount Rainier National Park, and I saw a sign from the Wonderland Trail. And at the time, I was feeling a little bit aimless, lonely, confused, unsure what I was trying to accomplish with the whole van life thing. And I saw the trail for the Wonderland or the sign for the Wonderland Trail, and I thought, I've heard of that. And also at other times in my life when I needed direction, the trail helped me figure things out. And so it just seemed like a good fit at the time. And when I found out it was less than 100 miles, I thought, cool, I can just go out there, do this real quick. In the grand scheme of things, then maybe it'll help me figure out what I'm supposed to be doing right now.
Nice. So how long does that take? Because it's a 93-mile loop, but you had some challenges getting campsites. So you had to do some really short days, which you might not have wanted to. How long does it take in an ideal situation to backpack this trail?
Yeah, a lot of people do it in 9 or 10 days. That seems to be about the standard because then you're hiking about 9 or 10 miles per day. I actually went to get the permit and said, I'd like to stay on the trail as long as possible. So I had a 12-day permit. But then on the 11th day, it rained a lot. So I went ahead and just hiked out because it was like, okay, I could just hike today and tomorrow's miles. And I think the 12th day, I was only supposed to hike 4 miles. So I was like, I'm just going to go ahead and get back to my van where I have like a change of clothes and
And it's dry.
different food that I haven't been carrying for the last 12 days.
And why did you decide to backpack this trail alone?
Part of the reason was definitely had to do with sort of the ongoing exploration of independence. And part of it is the same reason I hiked the Appalachian Trail alone, which is I didn't know anybody who wanted to do it. And I think I was really lucky in my sort of journey as a solo backpacker that I became a solo backpacker by default because I had no friends who backpacked. And so that's how I originally got into this activity. And so it's sort of how I've mostly continued to do it because that's just what I'm used to at this point.
And in your book, you talk a lot about the benefits of solo backpacking. And I think a lot of people, I don't know, a lot of women, I think, often are fearful of going outdoors alone. So, what would you say are the benefits of solo backpacking?
I think there's something really beautiful about being out in nature and sort of getting to respond to your environment in real time and not having so much of a plan. And, on the Wonderland Trail, of course, I had the permits, so there was a bit of a plan imposed there. But in other circumstances, and even some on that trail, to be able to do what feels right to you in the moment and not have to confer with anybody else, where it's like, this is a beautiful lake and I just want to sit by it for an hour and enjoy that. And I don't have any internal feelings of guilt or wondering if the other person there wants to be doing this too, or if I'm inconveniencing them. That's definitely a big part of it. And the other part for me has been a very long journey of coming to listen to and be in conversation with my own physical body. I say a lot that when you're hiking with other people, you're always accommodating each other in some way. And it can be as small as, are we stopping to take a snack break right now? And I think when you're by yourself, getting really, really in tune with your own body and saying, I'm going to eat exactly when I'm hungry, when I feel like it. I'm going to stop and rest. I'm going to go at the pace that my body wants to go is a really beautiful experience for those of us who were raised in a society that schedules your lunch breaks and tells you when you're allowed to pee. We live in such a structured world with our 9 to 5 jobs, so many of us, that we don't even realize how out of tune we are with our own bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of the other way around. I am used to doing my adventures on my own. And last year I did the coast to coast with a couple of friends. And that was the first time that I had to coordinate with other people and like make sure everyone was okay and make sure that we all were kind of harmonized and fitting in with our routines and schedules and desires and breaks and things, and that it wasn't always harmonized. And it was a really big experience. It was a really good learning experience in terms of how different it is when you go out on the trail with other people.
Absolutely. And I only recently, I hiked the Colorado Trail in 2021, and a friend I had met on the Appalachian Trail came and joined me. And we've hiked together a ton. We hiked together on the AT when we met, and then we've hiked day hikes and gone on different trips together since then. And I love her. We're really good friends. She's actually coming to visit me later today. And it was probably a few days in that I was just like, oh, I just wish I was by myself. Like, I appreciate that she was there and that we got to have that time together and socialize. And it's nice to have someone around. But it was pretty quick that I was like, oh, I wish I could just do what I want to do right now.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So, what would be your top tips for someone, maybe a woman, especially a woman, who's maybe afraid of solo backpacking, but they want to get started?
I think when it's new for you, some of the best things I can suggest would be, one, to go to a trail that is populated. I think it's nice to go do something on your own. And I think you can definitely get that sense of independence and the sense of solitude in nature. And also there are other hikers around.
Yeah.
They're just not with you. I think that lends a certain sense of safety for me, for sure. And it's one of the reasons when I was researching the Appalachian Trail that a lot of the blogs and things were like, go by yourself. It's totally safe. There's tons of other people out here. Like, you'll make friends if you want to make friends. There will be people around if anything goes wrong. I think having that safety net of just knowing there are other people out doing the same thing that you're doing, it made me so much more comfortable. Then there's the actual practical safety things you can do to watch out for yourself. And that's everything from storing your food properly so that you're not encountering nightlife critters. And if you feel more comfortable doing something like carrying bear spray, then do that. Like, if I think anything that will make you feel more comfortable to be willing to take that first step and go out there is worth doing. So if you want to carry bear spray, carry bear spray. But I think the main things that you can do are just being in a place where there are other people and then being well informed about what the conditions of the trail are. And I won't say that I'm always the best about that, but I think doing the research, and we live in such an information age, we have the information available. I think empowering yourself by researching the trail, knowing what to expect conditions wise, watching the weather, knowing what to expect for that, knowing what is the animal, what is the wildlife like out there, how popular is this trail, where am I going to be camping? Sort of answering a lot of those unknowns before you set foot creates a real sense of security for me. And I think also looking at the objective safety of it, like, what is the reality of me getting into a bad situation? You're greatly reducing that by having the information.
Absolutely. Yeah, Absolutely agree. I do so much research before I go anywhere. And to me, that's part of the trip. It's part of the fun
Mhm.
because it's like you start to imagine yourself on the trail and you start to dream about it. And it's part of the fun for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to share my story about the Wonderland Trail because, as far as I have found, there wasn't another book about the Wonderland Trail other than guidebooks. And so, especially as women, it's really empowering to hear about, read about, talk to other women who have done the things that you want to do. And if you're just feeling so angsty and nervous about it and you're like, is it safe? Should I be out there? Find another woman who's done it and talk to them about it.
I love that. That's great advice. So, getting back to the Wonderland Trail, what was the experience like? I mean, I've read your book, but for listeners, how was your experience on the Wonderland Trail?
Oh my gosh, it was everything, all the things. Number 1, it's just so beautiful out there and magical, and after I hiked the Wonderland Trail, I sort of made fun of people in Seattle for being so obsessed with Mount Rainier, because if you've never been to Seattle, people who live there are obsessed with that mountain because you can see it from the city, and they sort of have this cultural thing around, like, is the mountain out? It's like their way about talking to the weather about the weather. And so I thought that was very funny and I made fun of it a bit. And then when you are in the presence of a mountain like that, like you just can't help but be obsessed with it.
Mm.
It's like once you're out there, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. And I just never want to leave. And it's definitely one of those places that holds a certain magic. Some of the other things, the trail is really challenging.
Yeah, it
I
sounded like it.
I definitely looked it up online and it said 93 miles. And I was like, cool. Like I had hiked 650 miles of the Appalachian Trail before that. So I thought 93 miles would be no big deal. And I got out there and I was like, this trail is really hard. It's a lot of elevation gain, a lot of descent. And I don't remember a single moment of walking where I thought this is flat. You're either going up or down the whole time. There are some really lovely and scary river crossings, which I also was not aware of until I picked up my permit. And one of the rangers said to me, has anyone told you about weather conditions? And I was like, what are you talking about? And, or not weather conditions, but just like the conditions of the trail. And she said someone had actually died a couple days before I started my hike in one of the glacial rivers because the water was so high. It was a drought year. Or not, it wasn't a drought, it was a heat wave. So the glaciers were melting faster than they usually do. And so the rivers were really high. And on a couple of the rivers, they don't have very big, stable, sturdy bridges over them. It's more like walk across this log. And that was pretty scary. Yeah. And especially because they had told me right before I started my hike, this is the river where somebody got swept away. So then, of course, when I got to the river, I was like, oh no, this is the one. And you're looking at this river and it's like rushing. And they told me, listen for boulders coming down the river.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, oh no, I've never experienced that before. So it was definitely a learning experience for me. I highly recommend talking to rangers in the place where you're going to be hiking if you have the opportunity to do that before you start, just about like, what are things I should be aware of? Because I had never hiked in the Pacific Northwest. I had never crossed a glacial river before. And I learned a lot from that.
I thought it was also interesting that one of the rangers said to you, don't risk your life to make your reservations.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the reasons I included that in the book was because that really did strike me. Because especially as someone with less experience in the outdoors, I'm a rule follower and I want to respect the place that I'm in and I want to take care of the nature, so to speak. And so when they assign these permits, they say, like, we have permitted camping in Mount Rainier because it is a fragile environment. And we don't want people camping on the meadows and the places that are very lovely that would be nice to camp because it would be detrimental to the environment. And so I knew that going in. I knew why they had assigned camping. So it would be totally reasonable for me to cross a river that was kind of scary because I was like, well, I have to camp at the place they told me to camp. So yeah, the rangers did say if the rivers are really high and it seems not safe, don't camp obviously on the river.
Don't camp right next to the river.
Try to find somewhere where you're not going to impact the environment too badly, but you can camp on whatever side of the river you're on instead of crossing it and wait to cross until morning, which, yeah, was definitely a light bulb moment for me.
And so what was it like doing this trail solo? Because you did meet up with people along the way, but you also did have some stretches when you were alone.
Yeah, I will say that the Wonderland Trail was a much more remote experience, even though you're in a national park the whole time. I spent a lot more time alone than I ever did on the Appalachian Trail just because there are fewer hikers because everything is permitted. So there might only be 6 people staying at this campsite tonight and 5 at the campsite that you're going to next. And so those might be the only people you see between those 2 places. I did absolutely meet people, have some wonderful conversations, made a few friends who I still am in contact with. And I also spent a lot of time in my own thoughts, which is what I needed at the time. It's definitely what I went out there for. So I was grateful to have that experience.
And so what did you learn on the trail? Either about yourself or about outdoor stuff, or it's always a learning experience when you do one of these things.
Yeah. I definitely learned a bit, the river crossings and things like that. There was some new skills that I learned. And then I guess the question I went out on the trail trying to find an answer to was a bit more about where should I be and what should I be doing? I was looking for direction. And what I really came away with was something completely else, as I think we often do
Yeah.
when we start asking questions. But what I really learned, it's almost hard to put into words, but it was a bit about the concept of independence itself. I had definitely gone on the Appalachian Trail looking for independence at 24 years old, trying to break away from my parents, figure out who I was. The independence I was seeking on the Wonderland Trail was different somehow, but I was at that time 28 and very single and very lonely and sort of trying to perpetuate this idea that I was a strong, independent woman, while inside what I really wanted was a partner. I was really seeking connection and like romantic love, so to speak. And I think what I found on the Wonderland Trail was the seemingly obvious that you cannot at the same time assert yourself as a strong, independent woman with things like, I don't need no man to take care of me attitudes and also find love. Like there, those things
Might not be compatible.
like maybe the reason I wasn't finding love is because I was pushing people away. And that is a hard thing to admit.
Yeah.
That was really what I needed to unpack, and sort of through my interactions with other people on the trail and reflection on the past few years of my life, I was able to come to somewhere in the middle of that spectrum rather than being so far onto the independence side.
Now, do you feel like you arrived at these conclusions when you were on the trail, or did it kind of take a while after the trail for everything to sink in and fall into place?
I like to joke that it took writing a book about loneliness for me to find a person that I could
That'll do it.
allow into my life. I hiked the trail in August of 2018. I met my partner in June of 2019 when I was about done with my first draft of the book.
Oh, wow. That's interesting timing.
Yeah. I do think that the post-trail processing period was equally critical to my understanding of that as the actual trail experience.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of us forget. I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday about this, about how you have this trail experience, long or short or whatever distance, you get back from it. And it's like you go back into your normal life most of the time, unless you're writing a book about it, which I'd say most people don't. You don't always stop and reflect about the experience, about the inner journey. And how it's changed you, what you've learned and what you've experienced. And so I think a lot of times we miss out on that kind of follow-up, returning to home, reintegrating piece.
Yes. Yeah. I think especially in the long trails community, the AT, PCT, CDT, you're out on those trails for 6 months often. And there's definitely a conversation in those communities happening around the idea of post-trail depression. And I really believe that a big cause of that post-trail depression is people trying to go back to their lives before the trail without integrating how the trail has changed them. I just don't think you can go back and sit at the same desk and type at the same computer and do the same job and be in all the same relationships and continue all your same pre-trail life habits and hobbies. Like, I think we change when we do something like go on trail for, even a couple of weeks can be really change your inner thought process. And if we don't somehow figure out how to integrate this newer version of ourselves into our lives, we feel lost from that experience. Like it becomes very separate like something we miss instead of something we experienced.
Yes, absolutely. And I did a podcast episode about this, I think it was last year, about post-event blues, and whether that through hiking a trail or training for an event. Like, I always feel this kind of sense of loss afterwards. It's like, spent the last 6 months training for this race. I ran the race, and it's like, now what do I do? Who am I? Like, what do I do next? Like, it's like there's this vacuum in your life, like this hole that, like, how do you fill it? Because everything's different now. And it requires some reflection.
Absolutely.
And integration.
Yeah, I think racing is also a great example of that because you dedicate so much of your time leading up to it, like in the process. And that's one of the reasons why runners always have a race on this calendar, right?
Yep.
Like as soon as you finish, you're like, what's the next thing? What am I signing up for next? Yeah.
Yes. So in your book, you say, and I love this, through hiking is not about physical fitness or experience. It's about finding yourself and following your dream. So in which ways would you say you found yourself on the different trails that you've done?
I mean, truly, before I ever hiked, I was a person with no purpose. I was very lost in my early 20s. I had graduated from college and gotten a job and was sort of checking the boxes and doing all the things that we're supposed to do. And it didn't really occur to me until I had graduated from college that I had never made a decision for myself about who I wanted to be or what I wanted out of life. And when you realize that at 23 years old, then there's just this sort of like vacuum is not really the right word, but there's this sense of like, who am I and what's the point here and what am I doing and why have I let everyone control my life for the last 23 years? And not only have I let this happen, I was completely oblivious to it. I had no idea that I was not making decisions for myself. Like that's kind of a scary thing to confront. So I think really hiking was the avenue for me to start to make those decisions for myself, to start to see myself as independent or able to control my own existence. And I think there's a million different ways we can do that, but hiking is just what I sort of stumbled into at the right time in my life when I needed it. So I think for sure the AT was a big experience for me in terms of just realizing that I could do something other than what I was told to do, that I could decide for myself who I wanted to be. And that was sort of my leg. And then each trail since then has been a subsequent new learning experience, right? The Wonderland Trail for me was very much about learning to let other people in us alongside like me choosing who I want to be. And then how do other people fit into that? I went on the Colorado Trail thinking I'm going to write a book about the Colorado Trail, right? Because that's what I do now. And I think one of the things I really learned from that experience was that you can't force a story to happen in your life. I really also had recently come to terms, I guess I'm going to go on a short tangent here.
Please go ahead.
But before the Colorado Trail, I had read a book called Empty by Susan Burton about eating disorder, specifically anorexia and binge eating disorder. And reading that book, I realized I did not leave my eating disorder in high school. It was something I knew as a high school student that I had an eating disorder. And since then, I was like, okay, I eat food now, so I'm better. And reading that book, I realized, no, this is something I still really internally struggle with. And going on the Colorado Trail, I was hoping to reform my relationship with my body and like do some really deep work on like not just eating disorder, but body image. And so I sort of had this idea in mind that like, these are the things I want to like be thinking about on the trail. These are the things I want to working on, be paying attention to. And then I got out there and it's not that I didn't think about those things. I did not come to any conclusion or resolution on those things in the 40 days that I hiked the Colorado Trail, which for some reason I thought I would. I had a fantasy that this was going to be a resolved issue by the end of the Colorado Trail. And that's something that I suppose the post-trail processing period is still happening.
Still going.
For. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important that the intention was there. And so I think it's probably been going on in the background.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you're dealing with these like mental health issues, like those are long processes to unpack and move through. So I think, yeah, anytime you're able to take the first step of saying like, oh, this is a thing I think I need to work on, I need to deal with, I need to hike about, or however you go to therapy about, however you want to deal with that. It's like now at least I know I'm moving in the right direction.
Nice. That's good. That's because that's such a massive part of our lives. And it's good to have a healthy relationship with it because gotta eat to live.
Totally. Yeah. And I do think hiking is a really excellent way to, like I was saying about getting a better understanding of your body, right? When you sit at a desk all day and you're not very active, understanding how the things you put into your body affect you physically and mentally can be really challenging because your body isn't processing through the things you're eating very quickly. And so it's hard to see the correlations between what you're putting in and what you're getting out. But when you're on the trail and you're hiking 10, 15, 20 miles a day, you instantly see when you're not getting enough calories, when you're not getting enough of certain macronutrients, like
Yep.
when you're not getting enough protein, you can tell. And when you're not hydrating properly, you pay for that immediately. So there's just this different level of like sort of direct input output in terms of like food energy that is so clear when you're doing something like hiking all day, every day, that can be really challenging to assess when you're less active.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that I really liked in your book, you say the comparison trap is easily laid because in the world of mountains, there will always be someone doing something bigger, better, and crazier. And I feel like that's so true. And it's so easy to like watch these videos and read books and see what all the other people are doing and think, oh, they're so much better. They're so much bigger, faster, stronger, whatever. How has your experience of backpacking all these trails help you to let go of playing the comparison game?
I think one of the things that's a huge factor for that is that I've done so much of it solo, because when you're by yourself, you're not trying to keep up with somebody else. I mean, you do obviously see people and you get passed by people and you're like, oh,
I'm so slow.
I'm so slow. Right.
I'm
like
taking too many breaks.
That stuff is all still there. But those people who are walking by you don't care at all
Yeah,
that you're slower than them. And they're not like, hey, hurry up, come on. So I do think that experiencing those things by yourself, it takes a lot of the pressure off to be faster, to keep up with other people. And I will say, like, I have transitioned now into trail running, and like
Nice.
I made an attempt to set a fastest known time record last year. And so like, not that there is no value in comparing ever. I think there's the beauty of what the human body is capable of. And I think seeing other people do things that seem insane and like you would never do them can be really inspiring.
Absolutely.
But I also think recognizing where you are and going out to do these things for a reason other than to be the best is really important. And even not competing against yourself all the time. Like, it's really easy to get caught up in like, oh, like I did a 20-minute mile. Let me see if I can do an 18-minute mile. Or like, especially when you're out there with your thoughts all day.
Yeah.
Like it can even be easy to fall into that trap of just like, let me push myself as hard as I possibly can just to see what happens. And I think that can be a really empowering and beautiful thing to do. And also like letting all of that go and just experiencing to experience and to be out in nature and to be in your physical being without all that pressure. Like both of those things really lovely and should be experienced.
Yeah, it's like a balance of just enjoying and then a balance of challenging yourself.
Totally. Yeah.
So you've hiked various trails by now. You've done the Appalachian Trail, the Wonderland Trail. What lessons did you learn on the Appalachian Trail that you were able to apply to the Wonderland Trail and the Colorado Trail?
Ooh, I definitely packed a lot lighter.
Good.
After the Appalachian Trail. My pack, I think starting the AT was somewhere between 40 and 45 pounds.
I've done that myself.
Is pretty normal for first-time backpackers, I think. I am fortunate, you might say. I'm a pretty tall and large woman. So 40 pounds for me doesn't break the quarter of your weight rule. So yeah, so they say you shouldn't carry more than a quarter of your weight in your backpack. And I know that can be really challenging for women who are more petite because having the basic amount of gear sometimes can break that limit. But I will say, yeah, after the AT, there were a lot of things I realized I didn't need to be carrying.
So, for example, what? I'm curious now. Does anything come to mind?
I started the AT with 2 pairs of wool leggings.
Oh, wow.
Because I was like, I need thin ones and thick ones. They say you pack your fears, right? So if you're afraid of being cold, you're probably packing too many clothes. That was me. I was definitely an overpacker of clothes because not fashion, because I don't like to be cold.
Yep.
So there were clothing layers that I was able to cut out. And even on the Colorado Trail, the weather was so good out there. And I know Colorado pretty well from having lived here for a while that I was able to cut down quite a bit clothing layers for that. And Also food. As I've come to better understanding with my body and what it needs, I have learned more and more like what exactly one I'm going to want to eat while I'm hiking and what's going to fuel me the best. I ate a lot of peanut butter on the Appalachian Trail. Peanuts are really inflammatory.
Oh, are they?
Yes. So I would not recommend sustaining on a jar of peanut butter every 5 or 6 days.
Because as soon as you said peanut butter, I was like, oh, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I do like more almond butter, which I know is more expensive, but doesn't cause me the same like gut issues. Also, in recent years, I've cut out dairy and gluten because I have like intolerance to those things. And I feel a lot better when I'm hiking from that. And so there's little refining things. And man, people love to talk about food when it comes to long distance hiking. So really, like if you get the experience to sort of experiment with different things and figure out what really makes you feel good and what really gives you the fuel that you need. On the AT, there's always people who are just like eating Snickers bars and honey buns the whole way. And I can't even imagine what your body feels like after 6 months of that.
And I thought it was really interesting. At some point in your book, I remember you saying that the Appalachian Trail was very much about junk food for people, but the Wonderland Trail was very much about the super expensive, dehydrated, freeze-dried foods.
Yeah, people were eating all like pre-made backpacker meals on the Wonderland Trail. And I thought maybe just because it's shorter. And so you can say like, sure, I'll spend $100 on pre-made dinners for 8 days or 9 days, but you couldn't eat. It's just too expensive to do the AT that way. And also those meals are pretty bulky. Like if you're packing 6 days food out, it's too much space.
So what works for you in terms of food now?
I've gotten really boring. I eat almost the same thing every day. Yeah, so I eat oatmeal with nut butter and then freeze dried like strawberries and bananas. And then if there's like fresh berries on the trail, sometimes there's blueberries on trail you can add to your food. That's what I do for breakfast. And then dinner is ramen with seaweed and dehydrated vegetables and miso. So I do like the ramen mix seasoning plus a packet of miso. So it's like super salty.
Electrolytes.
And so many electrolytes. And then during the day, I do protein shakes. So it's like protein and then greens powder. So I'm getting like lots of nutrition just because it's hard to eat very much in terms of vegetables on the trail. So it's good to get that like vitamins in. I like Go macro bars are kind of my go-to. And then I do, when I'm trying to do bigger miles, I will also eat running gels like goo, which I know a lot of people are like, ugh.
They're easy to carry. They're small. They come in lots of different flavors. I'm a fan.
And yeah, and you can eat them while you're moving, like especially if you're a runner and you're used to doing that. Like it's easy to just like, whoop, there's 150 calories, easy. And there's a brand called Spring Energy that I really like.
Yes,
and yeah, so they're Whole Foods based and it's banana and rice are like the main base of it.
They have a nice texture. So they don't feel as synthetic as a lot of gels.
It's much more like eating baby food than like honey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't do the goos that are like sticky, that sticky texture. No.
So let's talk a little bit about your book. It's called Alone in Wonderland. Tell us about it. How was that process for writing the book?
Oh, maybe harder than hiking a trail.
Wow.
Definitely took longer. It was an exploration of my own thought life in the same way that the trail is really. I knew when I came off the Wonderland Trail, I wanted to write about it. I knew I wanted to write about the concept of independence. That's kind of what I had mentally when I started. I came off the trail. I immediately started writing the chapters about the trail. So I sort of started with day one and I was like, I'm just going to write a narrative of everything that happened while I was hiking. And so I did that first. And then I did a bit of a brainstorm with my best friend about what stories to include from the past that I felt like helped the story along and helped me to sort of explore and unpack the idea of independence. So I knew I wanted a little bit of the Appalachian Trail in there, and then sort of how I'd gotten to the Appalachian Trail, and then how I got from the Appalachian Trail to the Wonderland Trail. Then I did a bit of an outline of like, okay, these are the days of the Wonderland Trail and sort of what happened. And then I decided which stories would go in between. And so then I wrote all of those stories, put it all together. And then it was a long process of like editing, rereading, saying, does this fit here? Does this make sense? How does the flow work? And then having a set of beta readers who were people who, most of them were people I had met in passing on hikes or that I had some social media connection with, but didn't know me very well personally. So I had them read it and tell me, does this make sense? Are you following? Is there more information needed? So there was a lot of gathering feedback and hearing from potential readers before it was ready to be published.
Nice. Good. Well, I really, really enjoyed the book, and I love the combination of the actual trail stories combined with flashbacks from your life and reflections on your life. I think it just really balanced really beautifully.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think there are so many trail memoirs out there, and I don't know how many you've read.
I've read so many, and I've written a handful myself. So it's like...
I think that specifically through hiking books sort of fall into two categories, and there's true memoir and then there is trail journal. And people really enjoy both of these categories. I think there's some readers who read both and there's some readers who prefer one or the other. But I really wanted to write a memoir that like people could connect with. And I think that's very different than a trail journal, in that I wanted people to understand who I was and where I was coming from and how this experience affected me. Because I do think so many of us have shared some of these experiences. And I think that connection point is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Christine, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about your experiences. Where can people find you online and learn more about what you do? And where can people find your book?
Yeah, so I have a website. It is aloneinwonderland.com. And that is where you can get copies of the book. I have signed copies available. You can also see some other shorter form things that I've written. I have links to that. And I also have an events page to let you know where I'm going to be traveling on book tour this year. And then if you want to talk to me, there is a contact form on the website if that's your style. But then also I'm available on Instagram at Rugged Outdoorswoman. That's kind of my primary platform. So if you want to chat with me, like DM me, I'm super available for that. I love to talk about hiking. I'm happy to talk about writing a book or anything else that you are interested in. I'm on TikTok, also Rugged Outdoorswoman, but I don't think you can DM people on TikTok.
I don't know. I haven't really used it.
I still don't really understand how TikTok works, but I'm there. So yeah, those are the two places that I am sort of like putting my content out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This was great.
Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. If you enjoyed this episode, you might want to check out these related episodes. 492, I talk with Lori McKean about overcoming fears to solo adventurers. 466, I talk about adventures and integration. 419, I discuss getting through the post-adventure blues. 414, I talk with Rebecca Walsh about solo hiking for women. And finally, 367, I talk about finding yourself through solo travel and outdoor adventures. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It would mean the world to me, and it would help get this podcast out to new listeners. Next week's episode is another exciting guest. I won't tell you who it is, but it's someone who's been on the show before. So in the meantime, remember to visit hollywharton.com/497 for the show notes on this episode. Happy trails to you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.